Sometimes the end of a day arrives slowly and quietly. The pace of activity decreases, conversations come to a close, and the surrounding environment becomes calmer than it was earlier. In these moments, the body begins to prepare for rest, and the mind often carries the gentle expectation that quiet will soon follow. Sleep may feel close. The day appears finished, and the space around you becomes still. Even within that calm setting, a soft movement of thought can continue in the background of awareness. Mental activity does not always fade at the same speed as the body. Throughout the day, the brain has been observing situations, making decisions, remembering details, and preparing for what might happen next. When attention has been moving in that way for many hours, the transition into quiet rarely happens all at once. During busy parts of the day, awareness usually moves outward. Conversations unfold, tasks appear, and responsibilities guide where focus should go. That outward movement gives the mind structure and direction while the day continues. As surrounding activity decreases, awareness gradually turns inward again. Thoughts that were placed aside earlier may return with more clarity. The environment becomes calmer, though the mind may briefly remain in motion while it adjusts to the slower pace. This moment can feel quietly puzzling. When the body is ready for rest and the day has already ended, the continued movement of thought may raise a simple question about why the mind does not slow down immediately. To understand why the mind keeps moving, it helps to consider how human attention developed over a long period of time. The brain did not evolve in environments designed for comfort or quiet reflection. For most of history, staying alert played an important role in survival. Early human life required continuous awareness of the surrounding environment. Sounds, movement, changes in weather, and the behavior of other people could all carry meaning. The brain gradually learned to monitor many small signals at once in order to stay prepared. This system of awareness became deeply embedded in how attention operates. Rather than waiting for clear danger to appear, the mind learned to anticipate possibilities before they fully arrived. Preparation increased the chances of responding quickly when something required action. Modern life looks very different from those earlier conditions. Physical threats are far less common, and daily routines often take place in controlled environments. Even so, the systems responsible for attention have not disappeared. Instead of scanning forests or open landscapes, awareness now monitors conversations, responsibilities, schedules, and unfinished tasks. The environment changed, though the basic pattern of attention remained active. Because of this, the mind often continues evaluating situations even when nothing urgent is happening. Thinking becomes a form of quiet preparation, rather than a response to immediate danger. When the brain has practiced this form of preparation for many years, slowing down can feel unfamiliar at first. The mind simply continues doing what it has learned to do well. Modern environments, provide the mind with a constant flow of information. Messages appear throughout the day, conversations continue across different spaces, and new tasks often arrive before earlier ones have fully settled. Attention moves from one point to another with very little pause between them. This steady movement encourages the brain to remain engaged. Each new piece of information becomes something to notice, remember, or consider. Even small details can quietly enter awareness and stay there for a while. Because these signals appear continuously, the mind rarely receives long periods without input. The brain becomes accustomed to operating within this steady stream of activity. Over time, that level of engagement begins to feel normal. When the environment finally becomes quiet, the contrast can feel noticeable. External movement decreases, though internal activity may still be adjusting to the slower rhythm. Thoughts that were briefly postponed during the day may now return with more clarity. In many cases, this return of thought simply reflects the mind organizing what it has collected. Conversations, decisions, and small observations are arranged into a clearer structure once the day provides enough space. This process can create the impression that the mind suddenly became more active. In reality, the activity was already present earlier. Busy hours simply made it less visible. Recognizing this pattern helps explain why slowing down does not always happen immediately. The brain is responding to the pace it experienced throughout the day. Thoughts often feel more noticeable when the world around them becomes quiet. During the day, external activity gives attention many places to go. Conversations, tasks, and movement all provide structure, and that structure can make internal activity feel less distinct. As the environment softens, the contrast begins to change. There is less sound to respond to, fewer visible demands, and more space inside awareness. In that space, thoughts that were already present can appear sharper than they seemed before. This does not always mean the mind is suddenly producing more thinking. In many cases, the same mental activity has simply become easier to notice. Busy hours kept it in the background, while stillness allows it to stand out with greater clarity. Night often deepens this effect. The slower rhythm of evening reduces external stimulation, and attention naturally turns inward. Reflections from earlier in the day may return, and unfinished impressions may become more visible than they were before. This change can feel surprising when rest is expected. The room may be calm, the day may be over, and the body may be ready for sleep. Even so, awareness can remain active for a while as it adjusts to the new pace. Understanding this shift changes the way it is interpreted. The mind is not necessarily resisting quiet. It is often becoming more visible within quiet. That visibility can feel intense at first, though it is often a natural part of how awareness responds when the outside world grows still. Thoughts that appear during quiet moments can sometimes feel more important than they actually are. When the environment becomes still, attention naturally focuses on whatever is present in awareness. Without many external signals competing for focus, even small reflections can seem unusually significant. During the day, similar thoughts may have passed through the mind without much notice. Activity, conversation, and movement provide many directions for attention to travel. A brief idea may appear and disappear quickly while something else takes its place. Evening changes that pattern. With fewer demands pulling attention outward, awareness remains closer to whatever thought happens to arise. A memory, a small concern, or an unfinished idea can remain in focus longer simply because there is space for it to stay. The mind often interprets that longer attention as a signal of importance. If a thought remains present, the brain may assume it deserves more consideration. The thinking continues, not because the issue is urgent, but because attention has nowhere else it needs to go. This pattern reflects how awareness organizes experience. Attention tends to follow what is available. When the environment becomes quieter, internal activity naturally becomes more visible. Understanding this can make the experience feel less confusing. Thoughts that appear at night are not always deeper or more meaningful than those that pass during the day. They are often the same reflections, simply seen in a quieter space. When this is recognized, the presence of thought begins to feel less pressing. The mind is not creating new problems. It is simply responding to the openness that quiet moments provide. When the mind continues moving during quiet moments, a common reaction is to try to stop the thinking. The intention behind that reaction is understandable. Rest feels easier when the mind appears calm, and it can seem natural to push thoughts away in order to create silence. The difficulty is that attention plays an important role in how thoughts behave. When effort is directed toward removing a thought, awareness remains focused on the very activity it hopes to reduce. The mind begins monitoring whether the thought has disappeared, and that monitoring keeps the thought close to attention. Because of this, attempts to force quiet can sometimes make thinking feel stronger. The brain becomes occupied with checking whether the mind has become calm yet. That process adds another layer of mental activity rather than removing the first one. This pattern reflects how awareness organizes itself. Attention tends to stay with whatever it is trying to control. The more carefully the mind watches a thought, the more visible that thought becomes. A different experience begins when thoughts are allowed to pass without being treated as problems that require correction. Many ideas appear briefly and then move on when they are not given additional attention. In those moments, the mind is not being forced into stillness. Instead, awareness is simply allowing mental activity to follow its natural rhythm. Understanding this can make the experience feel less frustrating. A mind that continues thinking is not necessarily resisting rest. It is often responding to the attention that has been placed upon it. Some minds remain active more easily because attention has been shaped by care, responsibility, and repeated effort over a long period of time. When a person becomes used to noticing details, anticipating outcomes, and thinking ahead, the brain begins to treat that style of awareness as normal. This pattern often develops quietly. The mind learns that staying prepared helps daily life move more smoothly. Remembering small details, reviewing conversations, and considering what might happen next can all feel useful. Over time, that usefulness strengthens the habit of continued thinking. People who care deeply about doing things well often carry more mental activity beneath the surface. Reflection becomes part of how they navigate the world. Thoughtfulness supports good decisions, though it can also make quiet moments feel more mentally occupied. The brain responds to what it practices most often. If attention spends many hours each day organizing, preparing, and reviewing, those movements become familiar. Familiar patterns tend to continue unless something gently interrupts them. This does not mean the mind is flawed or unusually difficult. It means awareness has become highly practiced in staying engaged. A brain that struggles to slow down is often a brain that learned to remain attentive for very understandable reasons. Seeing this clearly can reduce a great deal of self-judgment. Continued thinking is not always a sign of weakness. It is often a sign that the mind became very skilled at helping a person stay prepared. With enough patience, even a highly practiced mind can learn a slower rhythm. Responsibility and continued thinking often develop together over time. When a person becomes used to handling many details, the mind learns to keep information active so that nothing important is missed. Attention begins to move ahead of the present moment, quietly preparing for what might come next. This type of awareness can be helpful during the day. Anticipating tasks, remembering commitments, and reflecting on conversations all support thoughtful action. The mind uses thinking as a way to stay organized and reliable. Because this process feels useful, it tends to repeat often. Each time the mind reviews possibilities or prepares for future situations, the brain strengthens the habit of remaining mentally engaged. Over time, that engagement becomes easier and more automatic. The difficulty appears when this habit continues without clear boundaries. Moments meant for rest may still contain traces of the same preparation. The mind continues organizing information even when the day no longer requires immediate action. In many cases, this ongoing activity reflects dedication rather than strain. A thoughtful mind simply continues doing what it has practiced many times before. Understanding this connection can change how mental activity is interpreted. Continued thinking is not always a problem that needs to be fixed. It often reflects a mind that has learned to care about details and outcomes. When this pattern becomes visible, it can begin to loosen slightly. Awareness no longer needs to treat every thought as a task that must be completed. When thinking continues for long periods, the mind can begin to experience a form of quiet fatigue. The change rarely appears suddenly. Instead, it develops gradually as attention spends many hours reviewing details, anticipating situations, and organizing information. This type of thinking often feels productive at first. Preparing for what might happen next and reflecting on earlier experiences can help decisions feel more thoughtful. The brain uses these processes to keep life moving smoothly. Over time, sustained mental activity begins to use more of the brain's available energy. Attention remains engaged even during moments when nothing urgent is happening. The system stays lightly active, ready to respond to whatever may appear next. Because the activity is subtle, the fatigue it creates can also feel subtle. Tasks may still be completed, and responsibilities may still be handled well. Beneath that steady functioning, however, the mind has been working continuously. When the brain has fewer opportunities to fully pause, recovery becomes slower. Quiet moments may still contain traces of the same internal movement that filled the earlier parts of the day. Recognizing this pattern changes how mental tiredness is interpreted. The fatigue is not always a sign of weakness or lack of motivation. It often reflects how long the mind has been actively engaged. Understanding this can bring a small sense of relief. The mind is not malfunctioning. It has simply been working for a long time without enough space to slow its rhythm. When the mind feels busy, a common response is to try to reduce the thinking as quickly as possible. Rest appears easier when the mind becomes quiet, so it can feel natural to push thoughts away in order to create calm. This effort can sometimes have the opposite effect. Attention moves toward whatever it is trying to change, and the mind begins monitoring whether thinking has stopped yet. The act of checking keeps awareness focused on the same activity. The brain responds strongly to attention. When a thought becomes the center of focus, it often remains visible for longer. Even a simple idea can appear larger when awareness stays closely attached to it. Because of this, attempts to silence the mind can occasionally make mental activity feel stronger. The brain is not resisting rest. It is simply responding to the attention that has been directed toward the thought. A different experience can emerge when thoughts are allowed to move through awareness without being treated as problems that require immediate correction. Many ideas appear briefly and then fade once attention shifts naturally to something else. This approach does not force the mind to become quiet. Instead, it allows thinking to follow its own rhythm without additional pressure. Understanding this can soften the experience of a busy mind. Thoughts are not always obstacles to rest. They are often temporary movements that become louder only when they are held too tightly. When the mind begins to slow down, the change is often gentle rather than dramatic. Thoughts may still appear, though they no longer feel as tightly connected to attention. Space starts to form around them, and that space changes the overall rhythm of awareness. This shift does not mean the mind becomes empty. It means mental activity begins to lose some of its urgency. A thought can arrive, remain for a moment, and then move on without pulling the whole system with it. As this happens, quiet feels a little more natural. The brain no longer needs to stay as closely attached to every detail that appears. Attention becomes less fixed, and that softening allows the mind to rest in a different way. Many people expect slowing down to feel immediate and obvious. In reality, it often happens in small adjustments. A thought fades more easily than before. A pause lasts a little longer. The mind feels slightly less compelled to keep reviewing what has already happened. These changes may seem modest, though they matter. A slower rhythm gives the brain more room to recover from the steady movement of the day. Rest becomes easier, not because all thoughts disappear, but because attention no longer treats every thought as something that must be followed. Understanding this can make the process feel less demanding. Slowing down is not about forcing the mind into silence. It is about allowing awareness to loosen its grip, little by little, until quiet begins to feel possible again. Many people imagine rest as a moment when the mind finally becomes completely quiet. Thoughts disappear, attention settles, and nothing continues moving beneath the surface. That image can feel comforting, though real mental rest often unfolds in a slightly different way. The mind rarely stops all activity. Even during calm moments, gentle movement continues inside awareness. Memories, impressions, and small reflections may still appear from time to time. What changes is not the presence of thought, but the way attention relates to it. When the brain begins to recover from long periods of engagement, thoughts lose some of their urgency. They pass through awareness more lightly. A reflection might appear, remain briefly, and then fade without needing to be carried further. This shift creates a form of quiet that feels spacious rather than empty. The mind is still alive with small movements, though those movements no longer demand constant involvement. A rested mind does not examine every thought that appears. Instead, attention becomes more selective. Only a few ideas receive deeper focus, while many others pass gently through the background of awareness. Over time, this lighter rhythm allows the brain to restore its balance. Mental energy slowly returns as the system spends less effort monitoring every detail. Understanding this can make rest feel more accessible. Silence is not required for recovery. What helps most is the gradual release of pressure to follow every thought that enters awareness. When that pressure softens, the mind begins to rediscover a quieter pace that has always been available beneath the surface of daily activity. As the mind gradually releases its need to follow every thought, a different kind of quiet begins to appear. The change may feel subtle at first. Nothing dramatic happens, and the mind does not suddenly fall into perfect silence. Instead, the overall atmosphere of awareness begins to soften. Thoughts still move through the mind from time to time, though they no longer shape the entire experience of the moment. This shift allows attention to settle more comfortably in the present. The mind remains capable of thinking, reflecting, and remembering, yet it no longer feels required to stay in constant motion. When that pressure fades, mental space slowly becomes easier to notice. Moments of calm begin to last a little longer. The mind does not rush as quickly toward the next idea or unfinished reflection. In this quieter rhythm, rest begins to feel more natural, not because thinking has disappeared, but because thinking no longer carries the same sense of urgency. Many minds spend years practicing movement. Planning, remembering, analyzing, and preparing become familiar patterns that repeat throughout daily life. When the pace finally slows, it can take time for the brain to recognize that constant activity is no longer necessary. With patience, the system begins to adjust. Attention learns that quiet moments are not empty spaces that must be filled. They can simply exist as they are. Within that acceptance, the mind slowly discovers a gentler rhythm. Thoughts continue to appear and disappear, though they move more lightly through awareness. Nothing needs to be forced for this change to happen. The mind already knows how to rest. Sometimes it only needs a little time to remember. As the day settles into quiet, the mind does not need to prove that it can become perfectly still. Rest rarely arrives as a sudden silence. More often, it appears as a gradual softening of the pace that carried attention through the earlier hours. Thoughts may still pass through awareness from time to time. A memory might appear briefly, or a small reflection from the day may return for a moment before fading again. These movements do not prevent rest. They are simply part of how the mind continues to organize experience. When the pressure to resolve every thought begins to ease, the atmosphere of awareness changes. Space opens around the thinking that remains. Instead of pulling attention along with it, each thought becomes lighter and easier to release. In that softer rhythm, the mind begins to feel less crowded. Attention no longer rushes to follow every possibility or unfinished idea. Some thoughts arrive and quietly pass without needing to become long chains of reflection. This is often how real rest begins, not through complete silence, but through the gentle recognition that nothing needs to be solved right now. The brain has spent many hours observing, deciding, remembering, and preparing. Allowing it to move more slowly for a while is not a failure of focus. It is simply the system returning to balance after a long period of activity. Quiet moments can hold a calm that does not demand perfection. Thoughts may continue to appear, though they no longer define the entire experience of the present moment. Within that calm, the mind gradually remembers something it has always known how to do. It remembers how to pause,